My son-in-law shoved me into the kitchen doorframe hard enough to crack the wood trim, and I did not say a word. My daughter stood 3 feet away and looked at her shoes. The next morning, I made everyone breakfast, smiled across the table, and told them I had decided to sign over the company. If you have ever given everything you had to people who decided your sacrifice made you weak, this story is for you. Please hit the like button and subscribe to Revenge Chronicles to support this old man's journey. Now let me tell you how the most expensive mistake my son-in-law ever made was putting his hands on me. My name is not important. What is important is what I built. 41 years ago, I started a custom furniture and woodworking business out of a garage in western North Carolina with $1,200, a second-hand table saw, and hands that have not stopped bleeding, blistering, or callousing since I was 19 years old. I named it Harlan & Sons, even though I only had one child, and she was a daughter. I named it that because I believed, in the way that young fathers believe things before the world shows them otherwise, that someday my family would fill in those spaces beside me. Someday the sons would come, the grandchildren would come, and the name on the building would mean something bigger than one man's stubbornness. My daughter grew up watching me work. She knew what sawdust smelled like before she knew what perfume smelled like. She knew how to read a grain pattern on white oak before she finished 3rd grade. When her mother passed, 11 years ago now, it was just the two of us, and I poured everything I had left into the business and into her. I sent her to a good university. I paid cash for her first car. I walked her down the aisle at a wedding I funded entirely, right down to the imported flowers her husband insisted on but could not afford. Her husband, my son-in-law. I will tell you what he is before I tell you what he did, because understanding the man matters. He came into my daughter's life polished and persuasive, the kind of man who knows how to speak to fathers at dinner parties and make them feel respected without ever actually respecting them. He had an MBA from a state school he mentioned in every conversation, and a handshake that lasted a half-second too long. He had opinions about my business from the first year of their marriage, quiet suggestions about modernizing, scaling, diversifying. I listened. I nodded. I thought he was enthusiastic. I confused enthusiasm with intelligence, and that was my first mistake. When they moved into the house 3 years ago, it was supposed to be temporary. My daughter had just lost her job in Charlotte, and my son-in-law's consulting firm, the one he had started with 2 clients and described as a growth enterprise, was not growing. They needed 6 months, maybe 8. I had 4 bedrooms, a paid-off mortgage, and a father's inability to say no to his child. 6 months became a year. A year became 2. And somewhere in the 2nd year, my son-in-law stopped being a guest in my home and started acting like its owner. He began coming into the shop. At first, I thought he wanted to learn. He asked questions about the client list, the contracts, the equipment valuations. He asked about the Asheville hotel commission we had just landed, a $200,000 custom millwork job, the biggest in our history. He asked about the property the shop sat on. 3 acres I owned outright on the edge of town, land that a commercial developer had been circling for years. I answered everything, because he was family. I answered everything because I thought family was a fortress and not a door you leave unlocked. The first time I noticed something was wrong was a Tuesday in March. My bookkeeper, a woman named Donna who had worked for me for 16 years, pulled me aside before I had even taken my coat off and told me she could not reconcile the accounts payable from January. $12,000 had moved through an operating account she had no record of authorizing. I told her to pull everything and let me look at it. She handed me a folder, and I sat in my office for 2 hours staring at numbers that did not make sense. The transfers were small. 2,000 here, 3,000 there, always just under the reporting threshold. They went to a vendor account I did not recognize. I did not say anything to my son-in-law that night. I went home and ate dinner and passed the green beans and asked about my granddaughter's day at school. My granddaughter is 8 years old, and she has her grandmother's eyes and my stubbornness, the good kind. She had lost her first molar that week and was very serious about the documentation she was preparing for the tooth fairy. a handwritten invoice with itemized negotiations. I watched her explain her logic to me at the dinner table, and I thought, whatever is happening in my company, I am not going to blow up this child's world until I know exactly what I am dealing with. 3 weeks later, I knew exactly what I was dealing with. The confrontation happened on a Friday evening. I had stayed late at the shop, reviewing files, and when I came home, my son-in-law was standing in the kitchen with a bourbon he had poured from a bottle I had been saving for 15 years. He had documents spread across the island, in my kitchen, and he was on the phone with someone, talking fast and low. When he saw me in the doorway, he ended the call. He did not apologize for the bourbon. He picked up the top document and held it out to me the way you hand a parking ticket to someone who is already late. It was a partnership restructuring agreement. The language was dense, and the formatting was professional, printed on legal paper with a notary block at the bottom. I read the summary line. He wanted a 49% ownership stake in Harlan & Sons, effective immediately, in exchange for what the document described as strategic management contributions and capital investment facilitation. In plain English, he wanted nearly half my company for doing nothing. There was a second page, a property transfer agreement for the 3-acre parcel. I set the papers down on the counter and looked at him. I asked him where my daughter was. Upstairs, he said. She agrees this is the right move, he said. The business needs leadership, he said. You are 66 years old, he said, and you cannot run this operation forever, and the longer you wait to bring in real management, the less it will be worth when you do. I told him no. The word was simple, and it was the same word I had said to every bad deal in 4 decades of business. No. It's about approve it. It's about approve. And Madasiamia, that is when he stepped toward me. I want to be precise about what happened because I have had to describe it several times since, and precision matters. He did not punch me. He put both hands on my chest and he shoved me, hard and deliberate, backward into the doorframe between the kitchen and the hallway. The trim cracked. My shoulder hit the wood and my glasses went sideways on my face, and I am not a small man. I spent 40 years carrying lumber and running saws, but I am 66 and the impact rattled my teeth. He pointed at the papers on the counter and told me to think about it. My daughter appeared at the top of the stairs. She had heard everything. I looked up at her and waited for something. Anything. A protest. A question. The girl who used to climb into my lap when she was frightened. She looked at her husband, then at me, and then she went back to her room and closed the door. I straightened my glasses. I walked to the counter and picked up the papers. I tapped them against the surface to align the edges, the same way I align pieces before I join them. I told my son-in-law I would review the documents overnight. I told him we would talk in the morning. He smiled, a slow and satisfied smile, the smile of a man who believes the hardest part is already behind him. He had no idea he had just handed me everything I needed. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my workshop in the dark, with a cup of coffee that went cold, and I thought about my father, who taught me to work wood because he said, wood never lies to you. The grain tells you the truth about every stress the tree ever survived. People, he used to say, are harder to read than wood, but not by much. I knew where to look. At 5 in the morning, I called my attorney, a man I have worked with for 20 years, a small and precise person who speaks slowly and bills by the quarter hour and has never once told me what I wanted to hear if it was not the truth. I told him what had happened. I told him about the kitchen. I told him about the documents. He told me to come in at 8 and to bring the folder Donna had given me. I drove through a mountain fog that sat low on the road, and I thought about my granddaughter's invoice to the tooth fairy, her itemized logic, her refusal to accept an arbitrary amount when she believed she had grounds for negotiation. 8 years old, I thought, and already more principled than the man sleeping in my house. My attorney sat across from me and read the restructuring agreement without expression. He read the property transfer without expression. Then he picked up Donna's folder and read that, and a line appeared between his eyebrows that I had learned over 20 years meant something serious. He asked me if I knew that my son-in-law had registered a limited liability company in Delaware 8 months ago. I did not. He asked if I knew that this company, a holding entity with a name that sounded deliberately generic, had been receiving wire transfers that appeared to originate from Harlan and Sons vendor accounts. I did not. He set down the folder and looked at me over the top of his reading glasses and told me that what he was seeing had a name, and the name was embezzlement, and that the amounts he could already identify from this one folder suggested it had been happening for considerably longer than 8 months. I sat with that for a moment. The fog was burning off outside the window. A woman walked past on the sidewalk with a dog that was pulling hard towards something in the gutter. I told my attorney I needed more before I moved. I needed the complete picture. I needed to know the total. I needed to know where the money went. And I needed to know if my daughter knew. He made a call. By noon, I was sitting in the parking lot of a hardware store on the south end of town, in the passenger seat of a truck that belonged to an investigator my attorney had used before. He was a man who looked like he had been doing this for a very long time and did not find it interesting anymore. He handed me a tablet with photographs and said, "Take your time." The photographs were from the previous 4 weeks. My son-in-law meeting a woman I did not recognize at a restaurant downtown. My son-in-law at a hotel that was not on any business trip I was aware of. My son-in-law at the office of a commercial real estate developer. The same developer who had been trying to buy my 3-acre parcel for 2 years. Shaking hands, sharing documents, laughing the way people laugh when they have already agreed on something. The last photograph was a screenshot from a conversation the investigator had obtained through legal means I did not ask about. My son-in-law had sent a message to the real estate developer. It read, "The old man is close to signing. Once the property transfers, we split the commission and I wire the rest to the account in Phoenix. My wife doesn't know about Phoenix. She thinks we're saving the business." I read that message 3 times. My son-in-law was not just stealing from my company to fund the life he wanted. He was using my daughter as cover, while he was building a separate exit for himself. He had a woman in another city, and an account she did not know about, and a plan that ended with him disappearing, leaving my daughter holding a legal instrument that transferred property from her father to a company her husband controlled, and she did not understand. He was going to rob me, use my daughter to do it, and then abandon her. I handed the tablet back to the investigator. I asked him if he had enough for a formal report. He said he had enough for a federal filing. I told him to prepare everything and send it to my attorney. I told my attorney to call the Financial Crimes Unit at the FBI field office in Charlotte. I told him I had an idea about how to serve all of this in a way that could not be appealed, mischaracterized, or escaped. I want to tell you about the moment I almost quit the plan entirely. It happened that evening. I came home and found my granddaughter sitting at the bottom of the stairs with her drawing pad. She was drawing a house. She drew houses constantly, always adding rooms, always extending the structure until it ran off the edges of the paper. She showed me the new addition. A sunroom she had designed for my workshop tools so that, as she explained it, the sawdust could get some sun. She asked me if everything was okay. Children ask this question more than adults give them credit for. I told her everything was being taken care of. She said she had heard her parents arguing last night, and her father said they would be moving soon, somewhere far. She said it in the calm way children deliver devastating information. She said she did not want to move because her school had a reading competition coming up, and she was in second place, and she believed she could take first. I put my arm around her and told her she was not going anywhere. She looked at me the way my wife used to look at me when she was deciding whether I was telling the truth or just telling her what she needed to hear. Then she showed me the next room she was adding to the house, a library with 2 staircases, and I understood that she had decided to believe me. After she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table across from my daughter and my son-in-law. My son-in-law was expectant. My daughter was watching him the way a person watches a traffic light, waiting to go wherever he indicated. I told them I had thought about it. I said that I understood the business needed new direction. I said I was 66 years old and maybe it was time I started letting go. My son-in-law relaxed so visibly, it was almost physical, like watching a fist unclench. I told him I wanted to do it properly. I had given 41 years to this company and the people who worked there. I wanted a formal signing. I wanted my key employees there. I wanted to do it at the company anniversary dinner the following Friday, a tradition we had kept for 30 years. I said I wanted to look my people in the eye and hand the company to the next generation with dignity. My son-in-law said that was sentimental and unnecessary. I told him that was exactly the kind of opinion that reminded me why the company was still mine. He agreed. I spent the next 6 days doing two things. At the shop, I worked. I finished the hotel commission with my crew. A job that came out beautifully. The kind of work that makes you understand why you started. At night, I worked with my attorney. I reviewed every transfer, every forged vendor record, every document that bore my son-in-law's LLC's fingerprints. I signed a formal fraud complaint. My attorney filed it with the FBI. A federal agent called me on Wednesday morning, a woman with a flat and efficient voice who asked very precise questions and seemed unsurprised by any of my answers. I told her about the dinner. I told her what I wanted to do. She told me they could accommodate that. She would bring a colleague. I told her I would leave a parking space near the back entrance. On Friday, I got to the shop at 4 in the morning, the same time I had been arriving since I was 25 years old. The anniversary dinner was not until 7. I had 3 hours to do the thing I loved most in the world, which was work with my hands on a piece of wood that had no agenda and no ambition except to become what I shaped it to be. I was finishing a rocking chair I had started before all of this began. White oak, hand-planed runners, mortise and tenon joints that would hold for 100 years if no one abused them. I oiled the wood as the sky outside went from black to gray to the pale gold of a Carolina morning. And I thought about my granddaughter's house with the sunlit workshop. And I thought about my wife, who used to bring me coffee at this hour and sit on the workbench and talk to me while I worked. And I thought about what 41 years of honest work meant and whether it could be taken from you or only surrendered. It cannot be taken. That was what I decided. It can only be surrendered, and I was done surrendering. My employees arrived through the afternoon. Donna, who had pulled the first thread on all of this, was the first one in. She knew what tonight was. Not all of it, but enough. She squeezed my arm when she walked past and did not say anything, which was the right thing. My lead craftsman, a man who had been with me for 23 years and had hands that could coax a joint to within 1/1000th of an inch, set up the tables in the finishing room the way we always did for the anniversary, long folding tables with white cloths, and the good plates we kept in the supply room for this occasion. My daughter and son-in-law arrived at 6:30. My son-in-law was wearing a suit that was too expensive for the occasion, and carrying a leather portfolio that contained, I assumed, the documents he expected me to sign in front of witnesses who would then confirm to any future court that I had done so willingly and with full understanding. My daughter was quiet, her eyes moving around the room as though she was memorizing it or saying goodbye to it. My granddaughter was not with them. She was at a friend's house for a sleepover. I had arranged that. Children do not belong at executions. At 7 o'clock, I stood up at the head of the long table and thanked my employees for 30 years of anniversary dinners and 41 years of work that I believed meant something in the world. I told them that good craftsmanship was the most honest form of communication a person could practice because a joint either holds or it does not, and there is no arguing with physics. Several people laughed. My son-in-law was watching the portfolio on the table the way a man watches his luggage at an airport. I told them I had a special guest tonight, someone I had invited to help close a significant transaction. My son-in-law straightened up. He looked toward the door with the expression of a man expecting an investor and prepared to perform. The door from the back hallway opened. 2 people walked in. One was a woman in a dark blazer with the kind of posture that comes from institutions, and the other was a man in a tie who carried nothing and needed nothing because authority does not require props. My son-in-law did not recognize them for 3 full seconds. I watched his face during those 3 seconds, the way I watch a piece of wood when I make the first cut. Looking for the grain. Looking for where the truth runs. The woman introduced herself. Special Agent, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Her colleague from the Financial Crimes Unit. The room went very still. The particular stillness of people who are not in trouble understanding that someone nearby is. My son-in-law stood up so fast his chair went back. He said, "This was a mistake." He said, he did not understand what was happening. He reached for the portfolio on the table, and one of my employees, a quiet man who had never raised his voice in 20 years, reached out and put his hand flat on it. Not aggressive, just present. The portfolio stayed. The federal agent asked my son-in-law to remain seated. She used the word please, but it was the kind of please that is not optional. My daughter had not moved. She was looking at her husband with an expression I had never seen on her before and hope never to see again. Because it was the face of someone watching a story they told themselves collapse in real time. The version of events where the man she married was frustrated but not dishonest, ambitious but not criminal, stressed but not predatory. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and laid 3 documents on the table. I slid them down the length of the cloth until they came to rest in front of my son-in-law. The first was the vendor account records, showing the transfers to his Delaware LLC. The second was the transaction record from the Phoenix account, the one my daughter did not know about. The third was the investigator's report, including the photograph of my son-in-law shaking hands with the commercial developer in an office where they were negotiating the sale of land that was not his to sell. My son-in-law looked at the documents. He looked at the agents. He looked at my daughter. He told her it was not what it looked like. He said the Phoenix account was for tax purposes. He said the developer meeting was exploratory, just conversation, nothing signed, nothing agreed. He said my attorney had manufactured these documents to protect a paranoid old man who was trying to sabotage his own family's future because he was too stubborn to accept help. He was very good. I will give him that. Even then, cornered, he was constructing a narrative. My daughter turned to me. Her voice was very quiet. She asked if it was true. The Phoenix account. She asked if it was true that he had negotiated with the developer. I told her to look at the 3rd page of the investigator's report. She read it. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the building settle, the old wood contracting in the night air, the creak of a structure that has been standing long enough to know its own weight. My daughter read the page and then she read it again and then she set it down on the table very carefully. The way you set down something fragile. She did not cry. She looked at her husband and said his name. Once, the way you close a door. He tried to argue. He tried to reframe. He tried 3 more versions of the story, each one faster and less coherent than the last. And each time he spoke, the silence of the room pushed back against him. My employees said nothing. The agent said nothing. I said nothing. We let him run out of road. When he finally stopped talking, the federal agent told him that the Financial Crimes Unit had been investigating the account activity since Wednesday. She told him that his contact at the development company had already been interviewed and had provided documentation. She told him that wire fraud across state lines, which the Phoenix transfers constituted, carried federal sentencing guidelines he would want to discuss with an attorney. He turned to me then, not to the agents, not to my daughter, to me, and he asked me how I could do this to my own family. I stood up. I am not a tall man, but I have been told I take up space in a room when I choose to. The result of 40 years of being the person in charge of a job site. I walked to the end of the table, and I stood in front of him, and I said exactly what I had decided to say in the workshop at 4 in the morning, with the oil on my hands and my wife's coffee hour in my memory. I said, "You put your hands on me in my own house. You did it in front of my daughter, and you believed she would say nothing, because you had taught her that your comfort came before her conscience. You stole from a company that 63 people depend on for their families. You were going to take my land, my legacy, and my daughter's dignity, and disappear to Phoenix with money you laundered through vendors I trusted. You did all of that," I said. "And then you called me family." He had nothing. For the first time since I had known him, he had absolutely nothing to say. The agent asked him to step outside with her colleague. He went. He did not fight it. The fight was gone. Because the fight had only ever been leverage, and he had none left. My daughter sat at the table for a long time after he left. My employees filtered out quietly, the way good people do when they understand that a family needs space. Donna brought coffee from the break room and set a mug in front of my daughter without saying anything and went back to her desk. I sat across from my daughter. She wrapped both hands around the mug. She asked me how long I had known. I told her. She asked if she had known, even a little, that something was wrong. I did not answer that question because it was not mine to answer. It was hers. She would be working on it for a long time. She asked about her daughter, about my granddaughter. I told her she was at a sleepover and would be home in the morning and would be perfectly fine because she had her grandmother's eyes and my stubbornness and an ongoing negotiation with the tooth fairy that suggested a future in contract law. My daughter made a sound that was almost a laugh. Not quite, but almost. I am going to skip forward now because what came next? The legal proceedings, the civil filings, the dissolution of a marriage. Those are not my story to tell in detail. They belong to my daughter and she is working through them with courage I recognize because it is her mother's. What I will tell you is what came after. Because that is what this is really about. The rocking chair I finished the morning of the anniversary dinner sits on the front porch of my house now. I sit in it in the evenings, when the light goes gold over the ridge, and the air smells like pine and cut grass. My granddaughter sits on the porch steps with her drawing pad and designs increasingly ambitious structures, most of which now include a chair, exactly like mine, placed in a window with a view. The Harlan and Sons shop is running. We hired 2 new craftsmen in the spring, young men who want to learn the old ways of joining wood. I come in at 5 most mornings. Not because I have to. Not because the smell of the place is the smell of everything I built, and I am not ready to stop smelling it. My son-in-law took a plea agreement. The details were in the local paper, and I read the article once and did not clip it or keep it. It is not a trophy. It is a disposal. My daughter has an apartment in town now. She is working at a landscape architecture firm. A job she was always capable of and never pursued because she had spent a decade arranging her ambitions around a man who needed them smaller than his. She is better at it than she knows yet. She will know eventually. My granddaughter stays with me on weekends. She has promoted the sunlit workshop room in her house drawings to what she calls load-bearing status. She says this means it is the most important room because everything else depends on it. I told her that was an excellent principle for architectural design and for choosing the people you trust. She agreed, with the seriousness of a person who has learned that some agreements are non-negotiable. Here is what I know now. At 66, sitting in a chair I built with my own hands, on a porch I own free and clear. Respect is structural. It is load-bearing. When the people you love are allowed to remove it piece by piece, they do not just weaken one relationship. They compromise the whole frame. The lesson I failed to teach my daughter early enough was the lesson I finally had to teach by example, which is that a man who puts his hands on you and calls it family is not confused about what family means. He is betting that you are. I was the wrong bet. If this story sat with you, if you have ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Have you ever had to expose a family member's betrayal to protect everything you built? Tell me your story in the comments. I read everyone. Subscribe to Revenge Chronicles so you do not miss what comes next. Thank you for being here.